Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third webinar in my Childless Chats Over Cocktails series. I am super excited about tonight's lineup of guests. We have three amazing women, and we are going to be talking about embracing a life without kids, how to know if you're ready. So I was actually really surprised because I thought this topic was probably going to be my least attended so far, because the other ones are much more broad in audience, I thought. And we had over 200 people RSVP for this one, so you guys were really excited about this, and I am so excited. I think it's something that's not talked about enough within the infertility community, and I've got three experts here who have lived through it and have all built supportive communities and platforms to provide support to people who are going through this. So I am just so excited, and a few just housekeeping items getting started. So while you guys can see and hear us, we are not able to see and hear you, so your participation in this is anonymous. If you have comments or questions though, you can use your chat box, which will be like a little icon at the bottom of your screen where you can ask questions or provide comment. So to get us started and to get you guys used to that, go ahead and tell us what you're drinking. I am drinking another Foxy Hot, which is my favorite go-to, but it's mostly just Pim's Cup, ginger beer, and lemon and Angostura, and it's delicious. So let me know what you're drinking in the comments, and we'll go ahead and just get started. So Tia, do you want to start us off by just spending a few minutes talking about introducing yourself and also how people can get in touch with you and what you have going on in terms of providing support to people who are childless?
Oh, totally. So, hey guys, I'm Tia. I probably have like the lamest drink tonight. I don't have any alcohol. I'm still kind of like surviving my virus of 2019. So I'm just drinking some mint tea. My voice has been in and out, so if I lose it today, just go with it. It's fine. I'll just like hold up a few cards. If you aren't following me on Instagram, that is where I do the bulk of like my sharing, the day-to-day, the good, the bad, and the ugly. It's at Ms. like MS, like Miss Rachel Hollis, but Ms. Tia Gendusa. So come find me or whatever afterwards. I'm sure Katie's plugged a couple links or whatever, but love to have you if I haven't talked with you yet. I try to make a point just to say hi to everyone and make sure I know where everyone's at. It's so interesting to see like the subculture of the infertility community sort of start to find their voice with the child-free movement, which is fantastic. Much like we were kind of chatting beforehand, and Melissa and I actually have a similar timeline. We're about 3 years out from folding with trying to conceive, and basically I'm an Ivf failure. Nothing really quite worked. I was temporarily pregnant with my son for the first trimester, but I lost him at Christmas in 2016, and we'll kind of get into the details of like how that sort of laid out, but we did try to do another round of IVF, which ended up being unsuccessful again. I had a chemical pregnancy. And from there, at the tail end of 2017, we sort of folded. And grief was overwhelming, and I was just sad all the time and felt alone and isolated and unworthy and like a failure. So I spent a lot of time in the seat of a therapist's office, working through sort of like all of the past focus mentality that comes with just feeling like a broken person, from reproductive standpoint. From that point on, we sort of focused on the future and what we could make of it. And it sort of took trial and error to gain momentum to like, what was the new purpose outside TTC and becoming a mom. And from there, I sort of leveraged the void, if you want to call it, with motherhood, and sort of birthed two things last year. If you're familiar with this company, Infertile AF, I'm a co-founder of a Chicago-based annual summit. We house everyone from the child-free after infertility community, all the way from those that have just gotten their diagnosis in infertility. The goal is to work on our mental wellness and come together as a community. There's so many like medical-based summits, and there's really nothing for us that isn't like solely focused on trying to have kids. Like we're trying to like encompass the whole life aspect of living, with our diagnosis. So that's what we do every year. And besides that, I started a coaching business for child-free after infertility in 2020. It's been going great so far. I've talked to a few of you that are on this webinar so far. I feel like I've just been having conversation after conversation. So you want my help, I'm here to give it. I want everyone to thrive and be awesome. And you can find out more of the coaching on miztiagendusa.com. And you can find out more about the summit on infertileaf.org. So that's my elevator pitch.
Great, thank you. And I will say, like, you are not alone in your tea drinking, because so far we have 4 tea drinkers, glass of water, and a red wine drinker. So the majority out there right now are drinking tea. So
Nice.
All right, thank you. Jobi, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, so my name is Jobi Tyson, and I am the founder of Tutum Global, a media platform for childless women. It's tutumglobal.com. And also I do research studies for infertility, hidden conditions, and also the psychological effects of childlessness. And I also host a podcast, I Can't Have Children, Now What? And that's found on ican'thavechildren.com. And I am drinking Riesling wine.
All right.
Yeah.
That's one of my favorite white wines. So that's what I'll be drinking today. And this is just a 2-minute, I guess, a quick introduction. So I'll tell you about my story after this.
Awesome, thank you. And Melissa.
Hi, everybody. I am Melissa Jones, and I'm thrilled and honored to be here with you today. And thank you, Katie, for having me. I'm drinking Pinot Grigio, so cheers. I am co-host of a podcast called Living Child Free with Eric and Melissa. About 3 years ago, my husband and I decided to stop pursuing parenthood. And shortly after that, we started a podcast. And it was simply the two of us just having conversations about what we were feeling, experiencing, thinking in real time, as we went through this process. So, and we don't always agree, and we don't always think and feel the same things. So that makes it interesting. But also, I think what is helpful to a lot of people about it is that, they hear another couple talking or other people talking about the experience, and it makes them feel less alone. And also it offers a male perspective, which is pretty rare. You don't hear a lot of men out there talking about what it's like to go through infertility, and also what it's like to experience being child-free after infertility. So I think Eric's voice is really special. So we've really enjoyed doing that, and it's available wherever you find your podcasts, any podcast app. And you can also go to livechildfree.com and find links to it there as well. If you go back to the very beginning and listen in a real time from beginning forward, not real time, but if you go back to the beginning experience and listen from the start, you'll notice that at the beginning we were using a different name because we were anonymous, but same podcast, and it's all in the same feed. So check that out. That's it.
Great, thank you. So, and I know, like you said, it was called something different when you first started it, and then you switched the name. So if people go to Living Child Free with Eric and Melissa, that will have all the old episodes that were from the previously named one as well.
That's right.
Okay, cool. If you have not listened to Melissa and Eric's podcast, do it. If you haven't listened to Jobi's podcast, do it. If you haven't started following Tia and getting involved in everything she's doing, do it. I mean, these 3 women are just incredible, and I think in such a specific space within our journeys as women who are childless, not by choice, it is just really difficult to find those voices of support, and here are 3 who are just really strong and amazing. So I absolutely encourage you to check out everything that they are doing. And I guess I should just tell a little bit. I'm assuming people know me a little bit more, but I do I may be new to people as well. So I went through almost 4 years of infertility, had a failed IVF cycle, and was diagnosed with endometriosis, adenomyosis, and fibroids and uterine polyps. My whole pelvic area is kind of like a war zone, I guess. So my official journey ended 2 years ago with a hysterectomy, but I was kind of on the fence about how to proceed for about a year before that. So I'm actually pretty close to you, Melissa, to your timeline of about being 3 years to when I really started to think about moving forward. So so that's a little bit about me. So the next question I'm going to ask you guys is more about your advice of how someone might be able to identify when they're ready to move forward. Like, what would they be looking for? How will they know? Because I think that's a very difficult question. But before we do that, I want to ask about your individual story. So more looking at how you kind of made this decision to embrace a life without kids, because I think this is like such a hard question, because as we all know, at some point in infertility, it starts to feel like you're playing the lottery, where like when you start trying to get pregnant, your odds are pretty good because most people are pregnant within 3 months, right? And then like at the longer that goes on, you're in the group whose chances are getting like smaller and smaller. And the more you try, the longer it goes on, like you're in a smaller percentage of like someone where success is possible, like your odds are going down. But the payoff is like you get a baby, right? So it's always like, what's that next thing that I can do that might be the thing? And so I think for so many people, it's really hard, especially when you've invested so much of yourself into this pursuit, to get to a place where you are ready to move forward. So I think that's why I wanted to really focus on this kind of point in people's stories of, you know, what was going on that made the difference for you in terms of getting to that place of, okay, I think I'm ready to just stop and move forward so I can open up space in my life for other things and not have this be a part of it anymore. So we'll go in same order. So Tia, if you want to start us off and let us know kind of what was happening in your story or in your journey that helped you get to this decision.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely isn't like you just wake up one day, or at least it wasn't for me. You don't just, I mean, I didn't feel like I just like woke up one day and was like, nope, no more, you know. Like I kind of feel like so we had like our miscarriage, right? And that rocked our fucking world. Like I have never experienced so much depression and grief in my whole life. I mean, I've lost people before, but like to go through that after all of the work that we did just to get to that point just felt like I was being punched in the face. And you know, my husband, bless him, he kind of like sat me down the day after everything happened. He was like trying to be kind, but it was just not the right response for me right at the moment. But he was like, babe, this isn't going to work for us. And at the time I was out of my mind, and I was like, what are you talking about? I already refilled all of our IVF meds. Like, we're doing this again, you know? So we were clearly not on the same page. And there was a lot of talking, I think, that happened in that next sort of 6-month period where the research that I was doing in terms of like success with IVF was our only choice for biological. Just FYI, we ended up being genetic carriers of the same disorder. So the whole point of doing IVF was we had to do all this genetic testing. Otherwise, we were going to try the, you know, IUI and all that stuff. And we had talked about, do we want to consider like donors or adoption or anything? And like, it's definitely something that you're like, okay, well, maybe. But for some reason, I always had it in my head that I wanted it to be what the product of us was going to be. You know what I'm saying? Like it was my husband's just such a unique person, and call it selfish, call it whatever you want, but I wanted to see what my child was going to look like. I just was sort of like hell bent on that. And I now know that that was what you call a boundary, right? Like our boundary was biological. So like at the end of the day, it was that. So after the miscarriage and through therapy, the idea of research for me, because I'm a big researcher, kind of switched from what are the different protocols with IVF to like, how many times do I have to do this to make it work? You know, and I started to sort of think of like outside of all of this and just think like, oh my gosh, it could take like 15 cycles, you know, and they say like it definitely won't work on the first one, but it could work on the third. But like, if you go to like 10, you should have success, but like it might be 20, you know? And I'm just thinking like, oh my God, that's like 8 more years of my life, you know? And it started to like butt up against, you know, financial aspects. And because of the finances that we were willing to commit to paying for IVF and all the genetic testing that came with it, our life outside of that was on hold. So the more we did this, the more our life was on hold. So I think that the sort of change with all of that was, how much longer am I going to let the rest of my life go on hold for this one part? And I started to realize how insane it kind of sounded that I was only focused on a baby, when I was sort of ignoring the fact that like, I have a degree, I have a kick-ass husband, I've got amazing pets, I've got like this spunk and creativity, and I was just pushing it all aside for this one thing. And for me, it was like, that's not a life. That's just insanity, like trying to continue to have the same momentum. So my heart started feeling this way. My heart started to have this sort of pull of, yeah, I don't know, maybe Mark was right, you know, but I did want to sort of like go all in on the last one. And sort of, for me, it felt like if I did it one more time, then that for me was like exhausting all of our options with biological, and like that was good enough for me. And I remember when I was holding that pregnancy test for the last transfer, and it was faintly positive, but I knew it wasn't going to work. I just knew it wasn't, it was very faint. The double line did show up eventually. And I remember looking at myself in the mirror, and I was just like exhausted, like strung out. There was like no color in my face. I used to have really long brown hair, and it was just like all my grays were showing, and I was just tired. You know, I'm like, what is this? Like, who am I, you know? So that was sort of like the end. I like went to Mark that evening, and I was like, I know this isn't going to work. I know they're going to want us to do like follow-up appointments, but I just don't care anymore. You know, I'm like, there has got to be a different way to live life, like beyond this, you know. I'm like, we were child-free up until this point. We're going to be fine child-free afterwards, but you know, obviously there's all the muck and shit to work through after that. But that's sort of like the transition for me. Was there more to that question? I'm sorry, I already forgot.
No, I think that's great. And I relate to so much of what you said. I don't really have time to like respond to all of it, but I think I can see myself on my story and a lot of what you said. So thank you.
Yeah, sure.
All right, Jobi, do you want to tell us a little bit about kind of what led you to this decision?
Okay, so I got married in my 20s. I am in my 40s now, but I got married in my 20s, and you automatically assume that what they teach you when you're younger, first comes love, then comes marriage, then comes baby and the baby carriage. And so immediately after we got married, we started trying to conceive and realized that it wasn't happening as quick. And of course you get so much advice from everybody. I mean, I got advice even from men trying to tell me how to conceive. So but nothing worked. And so I got all of the tests. He got tests, but he already had a child before me. But he even took tests. I took tests, the HSG and everything, going through the fallopian tubes and everything checked out. And the doctors just kept on telling me that I could conceive, and I believed them. But then 5 years came, 10 years came, and then 20 years came. And what I realized is that in this desperate pursuit of motherhood, I kind of put my adulthood on hold, and I just didn't think that was fair, you know. And then I just had to tell myself that you can't have children. And that was very hard to digest because everyone around me could. And I thought, you know, why me? But it just came to a time where that raw deal of childlessness I just had to say, you know what? I've always been childless. This has always been my identity. So I just have to be able to learn how to accept my raw deal of childlessness, what I called it then. And then I ended up 4 years ago getting a hysterectomy. And that's another story that I write about in the Breaking My Silence section, tutumglobal.com. And that was a whole new deal as far as I didn't even realize that the grief that came with that. And so, but what that also did was it had me to really sit in what was going on. And I didn't have a choice because now it was really finality as far as having my own child and the possibility of that. So I really had to just sit in that and figure and tell myself, listen, you're either going to sit here and pity yourself or you're going to live through and beyond childlessness. And I decided to find a deeper purpose in my life beyond childlessness. There were so many other things that I was other than not being able to have a child. And so I just had to kind of like dig into that. And from that, I'm able to help other women find healing as well. So that's pretty much a Cliff Note version of my story. You know, obviously, if you want to hear more, you can read all the different sections at tutumglobal.com. There's daily content there. And I forgot to mention earlier, my IG and Facebook is at Childless Women. So definitely follow us there so you can get daily inspiration.
Yes, and thank you, Jobi, and I love your Instagram, how you have like the side swipe where it'll be like, you know, 5 things to help with this, and you like swipe through. Those are always so good, and I find that they really like brighten my day and give me some thought-provoking things to think about. So thank you. I love
good to hear.
Melissa, do you want to tell us a little bit about kind of how you guys got to the decision to stop trying?
Yeah, so I will summarize what led up to the decision, but it's kind of a crazy story. So if you want to hear all the gory details, you can go back to the beginning of the podcast, listen to probably the first 4 episodes to get the full thing. But early on, we found out that Eric had a male infertility diagnosis, and it was recommended to us that he see a male infertility specialist if we didn't want to just jump right into IVF with ICSI. So he opted to do that. He went to a male infertility specialist, and he offered to do an outpatient surgery that, if successful, he was like, hey, you guys could probably get pregnant naturally. So we were like, great, you know, Eric said, sure, let's do this. So he went in and did this outpatient procedure. And, you know, you're in and out the same day. It's pretty quick. Well, within the next 2 weeks, like unbeknownst to us, something went very wrong in that surgery, because 2 weeks later, Eric was in septic shock. And we were in the emergency room, and that is, in a lot of cases, deadly. So he went straight into emergency surgery, and I didn't know if he was going to make it, but he made it through. And he was in the hospital for about 25 days. He got a colostomy in the emergency surgery and was under medical care for many, many months. And I was taking care of him as well. About a year later, he was able to get a successful colostomy reversal surgery. And so it's like, I need to take a deep breath even after summarizing that. But that was a large trauma in and of itself, that experience. And that was amidst like this life crisis of infertility. That's the whole reason why we ended up in that situation. And so that was very difficult, and we were pretty much in survival mode for a long time. And then somehow, I don't know how, but like a year and a half later, somehow we were able to get ourselves to a fertility clinic again. And that it was a different doctor, a different city. We go in and we just want to see where we're at with things. And IVF is the only thing on the table. It's like, you can do IVF with ICSI. So we did 2 rounds with one doctor. Then we stopped and did acupuncture and lost weight and, you know the drill, all this stuff. Then we went to a different doctor and did 1 more round of IVF. And after that, when the doctor called and gave me the results, which was that we had no viable embryos to transfer, I knew after that conversation, when I hung up the phone, that I was done. I knew that I couldn't have one more conversation with a doctor about what our options were and what they would do next. I couldn't hand over any more money to anybody. I felt like, I mean, I was obviously exhausted from being in this roller coaster for so many years, like 6 years. I was definitely exhausted, but I also felt like a lab rat. Like, I felt like I was a research subject. Like, I'm giving you thousands of dollars for you to basically just do guesswork. It felt like bullshit. It felt like, like you don't know what you're doing, but you're telling me, okay, you can do this and you'll have a baby. And it was just like, the banging your head against the wall, and you just know it's not going to work. I was like, I can't do this anymore. And then also, because of almost losing my husband and all of it, the cliches of life is precious and you don't know how much time you have left, that became really real for me. That wasn't a cliche anymore. And I just felt like I want to start living again. I want to move forward. I don't know how much time we have left. I want to really enjoy life and not live in this like crazy rapid fire grief cycle existence anymore. I want to move forward. And I think with all of that, lastly, is that basically my need to get out of it and move on became greater than my fear of never becoming a mother. I think that's where I was at when I was done.
Yeah, thank you. And your story, like, I know there's like more to it. You gave the very shortened version, but from listening to your podcast, like, your story is seriously one of like the craziest ones I have heard when it comes to infertility and how much you guys went through. And like, I mean, I know there are a lot of crazy stories, but yours, like just almost losing your husband and how much you guys went through, is just insane. And I know from an interview that I heard you on, you were saying that like people will still say to you like, oh, you should keep trying, or you should try this, or like, and so I think this kind of leads to the next question, because I know when I was making the decision to stop, a lot of it for me was I had a failed round of IVF that was really hard on my body. Like, my endometriosis was so much worse. Like, my fibroids, I had just had surgery to like remove them. They came back right away, and all my symptoms were like back just as bad as they had been before my surgery. And so I've just got to this place where I felt like I just hit my limit of what I was willing to give up myself. And I think that kind of ends up being something like a similarity that a lot of our stories have in common, is like, you're looking at this scale of like, how much am I willing to give to this versus like, what are my chances of it succeeding? And like, I knew that my chance of getting pregnant naturally, obviously before my hysterectomy, were like less than 1% based on what a couple of REs had told me. So I knew IVF was like the option that I had to keep pursuing if I wanted to. And knowing how hard the first one had been on my body, on my marriage, on my mental health. I mean, I was in a very unique and fortunate position in that my employer would actually cover 3 rounds of IVF at 100%. And even with that, like, they covered the first round, and I could have gone 2 more rounds. And even with the financial part taken out of it, I just could not do it. And I think that when I got to that point, there was a lot of shame and guilt that I had to get through, because I felt like if I stopped, I would be seen by others as like, well, you must not have really wanted to be a mom, or like, if you really wanted it, you would keep going and keep trying. So I think it gets very like woven into this idea of us living in like a never give up culture where no matter what it is, if you try hard enough, you get the ending that you're working towards. And if you give up, it's because you're like weak, or you must not have wanted it, or you didn't try hard enough. And I think that like when I think about how most parents get to be parents, like statistically, it's just from having sex. So my answer is like, if
What's
you
that?
get to a place of infertility, like you have already done more than most parents have to get to their child. And so it's easy when, I would assume it's easy when you're on that side of things to think, oh, well, like I have this baby that's the most amazing thing. And of course I would go through anything to get here. But like many of you had said, during that time your life is on pause. You're sacrificing a lot of yourself to get there. So I want to have you guys answer this kind of question or talk about like what should people be considering when they're making a decision on if they want to embrace a life without kids versus like trying that one more thing or many more things. Like if people are starting to get to a point where they're feeling like, okay, maybe I am done, like what were some of the things you guys took into consideration as you were making that decision, or that you would give advice to others?
Yeah, I mean, for me, finances are a big deal. I'm literally a finance manager by day, so numbers and budgets are important to me. And the question, I was sort of in the same boat as you, Katie. We didn't have full coverage, but we had really good IVF coverage. The only thing that was out of pocket was the premiums to have the insurance, and then all of the genetic testing. I mean, all in all, we still spent close to $150,000 just on genetic testing alone and things like that, that were like, because we went through so many rounds of IVF that were like, fine, you know, like it's within my quota, right? So just like you, I was like, we're just gonna hit it forever, you know. But at the end, it was kind of like the question that I would constantly ask myself is, if I had $1 million, if someone said, here's $1 million, would use you, but you can only use it to IVF or whatever you want to do to have your kid, would you do it? And at the beginning, I was like, hell yeah, no problem. After my miscarriage, I was like, probably, maybe, you know. And then after that, like last cycle, I was like, my body cannot take this anymore, you know. Like I am a person, and like it's like winning the lottery. Like no amount of money is going to fix the problem. So for me, finances are a big deal. And I know it's sort of like taboo to talk about, like wanting to like selfishly keep my money or whatever. But like, y'all, we got to pay bills. Like I have a mortgage. This takes a lot of work to keep this hair this blonde. Like, you know, like I have things in my life too that I want to accomplish, you know, like, and like you said, people that just like get drunk one night and have sex, like they didn't have to like drop 50 grand to like try to have their kids. So like they have no idea what it's like to like take out a second mortgage to finance a baby or whatever their situation was. So I have plenty of other things that went through, but I don't want to overtalk anybody. So but finances was a big deal for me.
Yes, I mean, totally valid. And I think people kind of will just nonchalantly be like, oh, you could try IVF or you could do this thing. And it's like, do you have any knowledge of like how much this costs? Like, I don't think people really understand how expensive it is once you get to that level of like intervention, and that most people don't have access to that. I actually read a couple of articles that said that only 5% of infertile couples move to IVF, which means that 95% of infertile couples or infertile people are never getting to that point. So I think we focus on IVF a lot, I think, because it raises the stakes so high, and it's like the last thing you kind of try. I mean, you can do surrogacy and like other things too, but like IVF is like kind of the thing that you think is going to work when other things don't, but it's at like a huge cost. But a lot of people don't ever do that because they don't want to put their body through it. They don't have the finances. They don't, religious reasons. So yeah, it's the financial piece. I don't know if I would have done even one round if I were paying for it out of pocket. So it's.
Oh yeah, that was 100% our thing too. We were like, we were told back in, I guess it was the tail end of 2014 when they were like, you have to do IVF, like we're going to cancel your IUI. I had no idea that like Illinois even had fertility coverage. So I was like, oh my God, how are we going to come up with 30 grand? Like, I don't even know. I mean, that's a lot of money in a year, you know, I mean, outside of everything else. So I was like, I don't really think we can do this. If it came down to that, we probably wouldn't have even gone that route. So this party would have been over long before it started.
Yeah, thank you. So Jobi, do you want to tell us a little bit about, or I guess, you know, responding to this idea of like what people should consider when they're thinking about this decision?
Well, I took a little note so I could remember what this, something that's very important. Childless women can feel silenced when others presume grief entirely as tangible losses. So it's very important when we talk about invisible loss. So these are women who are childless by circumstance, who are childless not by choice, or childless because, you know, they either can't conceive or sustain a pregnancy. But the truth is, we beat ourselves over that because we feel like we don't have the right to grieve. But that's not true, because the truth is, intangible psychological losses include changes of self-worth, changes in self-control, changes in identity, and changes of the worldview. So this is all covered with invisible losses, and that's something that childless women can all relate to. So when deciding to embrace a life without kids, I made a conscious decision to no longer secretly carry around personal pain. And I made excuses for so many years why I couldn't have children. I would make the excuse that I was on birth control, which doctors did prescribe me, which I just thought was asinine, because if I'm telling you I have infertility issues, but at the same time, I had really horrible periods because of endometriosis and adenomyosis, which I didn't know I had, and they didn't either. So they were trying to help me not bleed to death. But it just have to be another way if you're trying to not control birth. You don't give, you know, a patient birth control pills, but you just have to. I just no longer wanted to carry around that personal pain and not talk about it. You know, a lot of times family avoid the topic, and you avoid the topic with family, so no one really know what you're going through. But I no longer suppress my hidden trauma by persuading myself, and this is very important to remember, stop persuading yourself that your childlessness or infertility issues don't measure up against greater tragedies. And that's what really I had to do to embrace a life without kids, because it definitely measured up against greater tragedies. You know, infertility within itself is a disease, and childlessness creates psychological effects, because it's a hard pill to swallow, you know. So when you start learning that, you're able to embrace it and realize that you have a deeper purpose, and you try to find your purpose beyond childlessness so you can live through and beyond it. And there is a life beyond childlessness. So it just takes, life is what you make it. So we really have to just start trying to just find what our sole purpose is. And that's one of my words that I use, what our sole purpose is beyond childlessness. So that's really what you can do to try to get ready to embrace life without kids, because I think of it like this: we've always been childless, you know. So if you think of it like that, that's who you are. So embrace who you have always been. And a lot of times we try to imagine who we could be, but just love and embrace who we are already and always have been. And then we can just, you know, start really living beyond and through childlessness.
Well, Jobi, I'm so glad you brought that up. Like that was awesome. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I relate to so much of what you said. And I think that was a big thing for me too, was like, I was in the middle of like pretty severe depression and grief, and I didn't recognize myself. Like when I was in the middle of infertility, my interests, like hobbies, passions, things I used to do, I wasn't doing anymore. I was pulling away from relationships. Like everything became singly focused on this one thing. Mm-hmm. And I think that sometimes we feel like, oh, if we can't have kids, I need to like come up with this whole new identity of like who I am and do all these like grand things and come up with like this huge plan. But the truth is, like, part of it for me was just getting back to my baseline of like who I was before it started, and like starting to enjoy my life again, and like kind of get back into those things. So I really appreciate that. And I think, you know, this conversation isn't like focused on grief for this month, but we did do one on grief 2 months ago, and that is a huge part, I think, of all of our journeys. Is like, you know, if you do make the decision to move toward a life without children, like you are gonna have to work through that grief to get to like a place where you're feeling good again. So I appreciate you bringing that up. All right, Melissa.
I think as far as what to consider, if you're thinking about it, I think a huge thing to consider is just the power of making a choice. When you choose, when you're going through infertility, you feel like all your choices have been taken away from you. You have no control, no power. And when you're going through that, I think it's important to always be thinking, when you make a choice, and your choice is based on what do you really want to do, what is in line with who you are, not just what doctors are telling you to do, what the culture is telling you to do, what your family and friends are telling you to do, but what do you want? And one of the choices you can make is to call it quits. And as Tracy Clanta says, call the time of death on the dream. You can do that. And in that choice, there's also power. And it can lead to a fulfilling child-free life, but that takes a lot of work. So I also consider that if you make this choice, yes, you will grieve and accept what's happened, accept your grief. But if you really want to move into like a fulfilling child-free life, you're going to also have to choose to put in a lot of work and work through your grief and your disappointment and the life crisis you've been through in the transition. And like, if you put that work in, you can get to a place, you know, where your loss has transformed into gain and transformed into positives in your life that you can get from having gone through that loss. But again, that takes work. But so there's power in making a choice. There can be power in choosing to call it quits on trying to become a parent. And then also a lot of power and transformation and gain from choosing to work through it all. Because that's not going to come unless you make also that choice to work through that stuff. So that, I think, is a really powerful thing to consider, is just the power of choice, really. That was big for me.
Yes, I totally agree. And I think sometimes it can feel like you don't have any choices because the choices that you wanted to make have been kind of taken from you. But at some point there is this, you know, you can make a decision of like, I'm not going to try that next thing. Like, I mean, I still have one ovary, and people will say to me like, you could do surrogacy. Like, you know, you could still do this. And I'm like, no, like I am done, but people have such a hard time. Like, and I think it's because everyone wants the hope piece in the story, and they don't see having a life without children as like hopeful. And I'm hoping that's where we as women who are like having these conversations and trying to get our stories and voices out, is that we can show people that hope doesn't just look like one thing. Like, if you let go of this dream, you now have space to dream other dreams and have hope for other things, and that like you truly can have a good life without kids. And I think that that's something that is not talked about as much as it should. So one thing I do want to bring up before we kind of wrap up this section is that I don't think that there's ever an answer of like, it's after this many cycles or this many years or this much money. Like, every single person is going to have an individual stopping point that feels right to them. And that could be that as soon as you find out that you're infertile, that you're like, okay, I'm done. Like, I don't want to get into all of this. It could be, you know, something totally different, like that you're not childless by infertility, but through other circumstances in your life. And you could get to a place where like, you know what, like I'm sick of waiting for like a partner, and I'm just gonna close this chapter and like do other things. You could never, or it could be like after, you know, 20 rounds of IVF and you hit menopause and you literally can't go anymore or whatever. there's no like one answer that's going to work for everyone. It really is individual to you. And I think that goes to someone asked us a question of, I'm curious if you feel that this is a conversation for me. 2 miscarriages with a PPROM, I actually don't know what that is, at 25 weeks with the death of my son. So sorry. The doctors can't explain why I can't continue to pregnancy. As someone who can get pregnant but can't carry pregnancy to term. So my answer would be, it's none of us can tell you if this conversation is for you. Like that conversation, like that's for you to decide. Like I would never tell someone else to stop trying. And I don't know about like your medical conditions, but I think it's just such like a unique thing to each person that I would never tell someone that they should quit trying or that this is like the right path for them. I think it's like when you get to that place, you'll probably know, and you'll know that you're starting to think about it. Okay, so we don't have a ton of time. We got 15 minutes left. So let's maybe do a little bit shorter answers on this one, but if anyone has like a few key pieces of advice for if couples are not on the same page, because I think as you start to go through like making very difficult decisions about how you want to proceed, this is pretty likely that you may not have two people who are on the same page about what they are or aren't willing to try or how they want to move forward. So I know, Tia, you kind of mentioned already that your husband at some point was like, this isn't going to happen for us. And so it sounds like he was maybe at a point where he's like, I think I'm done with this, maybe before you. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, the thing is you know, he didn't want to see me going through this, you know, because the women have to do all of the shit, right? Like the guys just have to like in a cup, but like, and that's embarrassing. But, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, he's just tired of seeing me like struggle, you know, and then, you know, when it doesn't take, it's I take the brunt of it because it's literally in me, you know, the embryo's in me. I'm dealing with the transfer and the Valium and the shots and everything else that goes with it. So when he said that, he was coming from a place of love, you know, I mean, he's kind of a blunt, you know, Italian personality in general. So, I mean, that's just like his personality, but it was coming from a really solid place, but he just simply, you know, he kept saying, and it was true, I just had to like sort of come around at a slower pace. He married me, period. Like he chose me. It wasn't, you know, the expansion of us in a house and cars or pets or kids or anything else. He married me for me and our life together. So anything else is just a bonus. And it was sort of something I carried with me when it took me a little longer to come around, because I'm more stubborn as a person. So throwing in the towel and stopping treatment and walking away completely just seemed, you know, more emotional for me. Whereas for him, it was just like, well, duh, it's not working. Let's go try something else and like kick ass in another part of our life. Like he's just very like decisive. And I was more like, yeah, but I did all this stuff and I worked so hard and everything. So, but eventually you kind of, I mean, you have to get on the same page to find success child-free. So we got there.
All right, thanks. Jobi, do you have any advice for partners who may not be on the same page at the same time?
Well, due to time, I'll just skip myself, but I will say that everyone does what's right at the time for them. Mm-hmm. And it's no right or wrong answer with that, you know, and you're not going to always be on the same page with anything a lot of times in your relationship. So you just have to compromise. And yeah, it's a lot for women to endure more than men if the woman is the one that's having the infertility issues. So you just have to just compromise and have an understanding, and just make sure that you're not a part of perpetuating the stigma, and just be open and talk about what you're going through so you can start to break the silence, because we have to own our voice and control our narrative. And husbands and spouses, they may not understand. So your families, your spouses, You just have to be open with them what you're actually going through, so they can be a part of your journey and not be outside of it.
That is great advice. Thank you. Melissa.
Well, I would say, first of all, like, don't assume you and your partner disagree, because like in infertility, your feelings change quite often. And I would say check in regularly with each other and be very honest about where you're at and what you're thinking, because you may not, just because you disagreed 3 months ago doesn't mean if you bring it up today you're going to disagree. So there, a lot of times you're assuming what your partner's thinking and feeling, so really check in a lot. But if you actually are honest and you do disagree, I think it's important to remember that with something that's this emotional, not everything is going to be a perfect 50-50 decision. If you respect your partner and you value them and their opinions, there might be times when you say, okay, let's say I feel like I'm done, but my partner wants to do something else. If I value them, I respect their opinion, maybe it's okay for me to agree to do that one more thing so that their conscience can be clear and they can get to where they need to get to. So it's not always going to be a perfect 50-50 decision. And Eric was ready to call it quits before I was, but he did value and respect me and where I was, and realized I needed to do more. And so he said okay, and we did more, and then eventually I got to the place where I was done too, and then we were on the same page. So that happens a lot throughout the course of it, and you know, it does come down, I think, a lot of times to respect and valuing your partner. There's a give.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I don't want to, I know we only have like a couple minutes left, but I was just thinking about the hierarchy of like your husband to like this dream. I feel like a lot of times, you know, we're so focused on the baby that we sort of like push the spouse or the partner or like the rest of your life like down, you know. But the reality is like, you know, at the end of the day, regardless of if you have the kid or not, even if you had the kid like in 18 years or whatever it is, you're still going to be just this. So like if this isn't good now and you're constantly dismissing your spouse or the person that's like helping you live life, I mean, what is that, you know, it's like, how does that translate into like your a good successful future? You know, it's not healthy. So Melissa, I was just thinking like it does take a little ebb and flow. I mean, like I said, you and I are sort of similar with the guys were like the hard and the fast decision, and we were like, yeah, but like coming to terms with stuff. But like sort of like taking a step back and refocusing on like what is most important. And like for me, it was my husband Mark comes first, and that was all that mattered. So like why continue to like cause that stress, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for that. So we are going to have a few minutes for questions. And we had one in the question box, but it was, how does your spouse or partner play into your decision to be childless, which I think is what we've just been covering. So if anyone else has questions at home, if you guys want to submit your question in the Q&A or in the chat box down below, we'll have a few minutes to answer those. But yeah, I think for me, my husband definitely got to a stopping place before me. And I think, Melissa, to what you were saying about like one partner may need to like try that additional thing to get to a place where they're like, okay, that's what I needed to do, like to feel like this is like I gave it my all kind of. I had a similar experience where I really thought a lot about doing a second IVF cycle, and you know, my husband said, well, I don't want to go through that again. And to what you were saying, Tia, like a lot of it was because he just saw the place of grief I was in, how much harm it did to my body to do all the hormones and everything. And so he was like, I don't think it's worth it to put yourself through that again. And I don't want to see you like hurting this much. So he was ready, but he ultimately said, if you decide to do it again, I'll go through it with you, but I don't really want to be a part of it. Like, I don't want to do the shots. I don't want to be around. Like, it's kind of going to be your own thing because I just can't do it again. And I thought that was like a fair response. And I would say that if you find that you're disagreeing with your partner, therapy can be incredibly helpful. We never did couples therapy, but I was seeing a therapist where what was coming up in our relationship, I would bring into my therapist and like process, because I was so gung-ho on like, this is the only option, that it was hard for me to listen to him sometimes and to process like what he was saying and to see that, oh, actually this is making sense. And there's a book called The Baby Decision that is actually for like couples who are not sure if they want to have kids. So it's more for like if you're on the fence before you start trying. But I did find it was really helpful for me when I got to that place, because it helps you see both sides of like the pros and cons of having a kid. And it did help me start to see like some of the benefits of a child-free life, and like not think about it in such a black and white way. So I would say, like, if you're having disagreements, take some space, like, you know, if you can, take some time off to just like process. And, you know, therapy can be incredibly helpful. So I guess no one has questions. We got like 4 minutes. So, oh yeah.
There's a bunch in the chat.
I see
Oh, in
some.
the chat? Okay,
Yeah.
I have the Q&A up. Okay, let's see what we've got. Okay, oh yeah, we do have a lot. All right. Are any of these like standing out to any of you where you're like, yes, I really want to answer this?
Well, the first one, I mean, shit, I could answer all of these, but like, you know, the thing is like, okay, so someone was asking, how do you handle losing friends when they become pregnant? And, you know, I don't think you like lose friends. I mean, I think that the dynamic of the relationship can change. For me, it is sort of like a triggering thing for close friends to be pregnant with, I don't know, like this is the whole idea of pregnancy sort of like causes my grief to spark back up. And it's something that I definitely am cognizant of and I work through. But there's, you know, I mean, it's just, you have to think about it as like the bigger picture. Like these people are pregnant and then they're going to spend all of their time trying to like deal with something that can't fend for itself, right? Like the baby has like no idea like how to like live life. So like that's why the parents are so enveloped in the child's success. But like if you think about it, like when you went to school, or when you started taking on like a new career, or you were trying to buy a house, or like whatever like a big thing was in your life, you had to like focus in. And like that may have meant you didn't go out with your friends as often, or you didn't spend as much money. If you think about it like in that way, like sometimes people just go away for a period of time. Like some people just distance themselves, or they're focused on their own lives or whatever. And there are opportunities to sort of reconnect with people and check in on child-free options. Like you can say, hey mama, like, do you have a free evening that like, you know, baby daddy can like watch the kids, and like, let's go grab a drink, or like go grab a cup of coffee and like catch up and like find out like how life has been going, and like tell me all about the changes. I mean, it's up to us as well to take an interest in like our friends that we value, even if their lives aren't identical to ours. So it's, if you're feeling envious or jealous or whatever, those are definitely feelings that you that are common and valid and all normal, but they're one-sided. You know, it's, you know, a lot of times there's just an assumption that comes with a lot of those emotions. So I think that the loss is only like a temporary thing, unless perhaps they weren't close enough with you in the first place. So that's that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great response. Yeah, Jobi.
Yeah, I saw a question that asked, once you made your decision, did you find you had second thoughts? That's a really good question. And you know, sometimes when you get to that, with anything in life, when you get to that end, it's just like you're exhausted, and you have to really believe that you've done all you can and not feel bad about it. But of course, you're going to have second thoughts, especially with this mother-centric society, where everything around you reminds you that you're not a mother. And also, I wrote a piece on tutumglobal.com the other day about how to manage being in a family full of children. And so I talked about my experience for Thanksgiving holiday. So you may have second thoughts, but you just have to believe that you've done all you can, and you don't think that you've given up, because sometimes it's just the cards that you're dealt. I mean, it's 1 out of 5 women will remain childless, and for 90% of them, it was not by choice. So you're not in this alone, and so you just have to realize that second thoughts are normal, but it's just, maybe think of it as the cards that you were dealt. So I don't know if anyone else has something to say about that question, because it was really a good question.
I think that's a good question.
Yeah, go ahead,
too.
Melissa.
Oh, I was gonna say, I think that's a really good question too, and I think that sometimes that fear makes people not want to make the decision to be child-free, because they have this huge fear of regrets. And I'd just like to say that just because you make a decision today that you're done, doesn't mean that you can't change your mind. You know, there are times when I thought I was done and I wasn't. You know, you have to give it a little time. 2-3 months later, I was like, I'm not done. But then the last time, it was like I really knew I was done, and I felt it, and I never looked back after that last decision as far as feeling like I really wanted to hop back into infertility. I did not. But it's okay, just because you speak it out loud today that you think you might want to stop, or that you're ready to stop, doesn't mean that you can't change your mind if something changes. But I also think that you're part of what Jobi was saying too, is like there was a cause to your infertility, and that cause was not you not wanting it bad enough or these other things. That cause was an actual diagnosis, and that's why it didn't happen for you. It's not because there's something you didn't do or something you didn't try, you know. And knowing that there was a real cause to it, outside of you, like a separate factual medical reason, allows you to move forward without regrets. I think just reminding yourself that this was not your doing.
Right.
So I know we're a few minutes over, but there's a question about adoption, and I do want to give, I'm going to give this one to you, Melissa, because I know this is something that you looked into, and then I want to wrap up. So are you guys okay to go for like 5 more minutes? I know we're a little bit past.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think I'm glad the adoption thing came up, because as I'm sure all of you on this call know, like that's going to be the #1 question you get is like, cool, you can just adopt, you should adopt. Like that's always the answer. So Melissa, do you want to talk to us about this adoption question? Like, did you consider it? Why did you decide not to?
I think that it goes through everybody's mind as a possible option for how to become a parent, separate from your own infertility and everything. It's always out there, it crosses everybody's mind, I think. We did consider it after 2 rounds of IVF. After that, we considered it a couple of times, and we did go to a seminar where we learned more about the state of adoption in the United States right now, and options, and what the process is like, and learned a lot of facts about the reality of adoption right now, and that most of it is open adoption, and what does that mean, and the cost, and how long it usually takes for you to get a child, and you know, the whole thing. We learned about it all. And first of all, I would say that I think that with any option and choice you might make, learning a lot about each option, visualizing yourself in that situation, and then seeing how you feel is really important. And we did that for adoption. And for us, it didn't feel like something that we wanted to pursue. It didn't feel, we were exhausted and going on this whole other journey with possible more grief, more disappointment, more money. You know, for us, it just didn't feel like something we wanted to pursue, and it just didn't feel like a fit for us. And I don't think that's fair for any child who needs a loving home, like you should feel excited about that. If you're going to sign up for it, you should feel that that is something you really want to do, that you really want to provide this home, you want to go through this process, that separate from your own infertility, that path is something you are like, yes, I want to do this and I'm excited about it. And that's not where we were. You know, we had run out of steam. We were ready to move forward and stop pursuing parenthood.
Yes, I relate to that so much because I think for me it was the same where it's like if you decide to move toward adoption, you don't get credit for everything that you've been through. Like you're starting at day one in a completely different process, and the amount of time it can take, the amount of money, there are ethical issues involved when you look into it that you've got to wrestle with. There's just so much that goes into it that a lot of the reasons I felt like my life's on hold, I want to get out of this grief, I want to be able to have more control over my life and get back into my identity. I felt like for me, like starting this new path of adoption would keep me in that space that I was trying to get out of, and I just couldn't go through like heartbreak, putting life on pause, all that. It was just too much. So for me, that's why I decided not to. So
and real quick,
oh yeah.
No, I just really quick, I was going to say, and adoption does not take away from the grief that you felt from not being able to have a child. So you also have to consider that. And so if you're deciding on adoption, which is a wonderful choice for a lot of people, but if you're deciding on that option, you just have to make sure that you're mentally prepared and at a good psychological place in your life, because it doesn't take away of what you've experienced all the years before. So.
Right. I totally agree with that, Jobi. That was great.
Yeah, thank you for that. Absolutely. Okay, so we need to wrap up. I will say, no, we didn't get to everyone's questions. So if we didn't get to your question and there was one of my guests that you specifically would love to hear an answer, maybe hit them up on Instagram. Maybe they'll do a story answer to it or a blog post or something to respond to you there. So in terms of finding my guests and connecting with them, again, I just want to give them a little shout out. So for Tia, you can find her on Instagram at Miss MS Tia, TIA, Gendusa, which is GENDUSA. And then her website is misstiagendusa.com. She does child-free coaching, infertile AF, amazing. Melissa can be found on livechildfree.com, and then on Instagram, her handle is at livechildfree. Jobi could be found at on Instagram. Her handle is at childlesswomen. Her website is tutumglobal.com, which is TUTUM global.com. And so I want to thank all of you for being here tonight, and also for the conversation and support that you have all created for our community. And it's definitely made me feel less alone, and I'm sure you're impacting thousands of others as well. A plug for my next webinar is it's going to be Sunday, February 9th, and it's going to be on child-free perks, so identifying the benefits of a life without kids. And we're going to have on Ashley and Eric from the podcast called Kidless Podcast, who are child-free by choice, and then Christine from the blog Simply Steen, who is child-free after infertility. So info to RSVP for that will be coming up soon. And I know like the three of us didn't get into kind of the benefits of after you make that decision. There are some perks and like things to look forward to with a child-free life. And I think sometimes that can be hard to see when you're in the thick of it. So maybe if you guys could each brainstorm like just 2 or 3 words of what you enjoy most about your life without children, or like what people can look forward to. What do you guys have?
Right now?
Yeah. Or like a sentence, just like what are some of the things that opened up space for?
Yeah, career potential. I mean, we all created something from this, right? I mean, yeah, our careers are kicking ass right now, I think.
I would say as far as a couple words real quick, I would say travel, which is cliche, but I don't care. I love we love to travel, and we have more time to do that. I self-growth, because I have more time and energy to be able to learn about myself and evolve, because I have more time. And love, I have a lot of love in my life, and you don't have to have a child to have that. I have a lot of love. So those would be my words.
Well, travel is very important. And also on tutumglobal.com, I created a list with a partnership with booking.com. And it's still growing, the list, but it's adults only travel, because I found that a trigger for many childless women is being around children when they travel. And so I accumulated a list of different travels, bed and breakfast, destinations, hotels, different places. So you can go on there to just find out different adults only travel for you all. And I don't know, it's also just finding deeper purpose, because, a lot of mothers that I am friends with and with my family, they're just focused on motherhood a lot of times, and just put their purpose on the wayside. So just finding deeper purpose in your life. So that's, I guess, perks if we have to name it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think that there's an opportunity to have, I feel like a lot of like motherhood conversations that you typically have are so like, oh yeah, Johnny went to baseball and then did this, but you can actually work on asking the better questions and having the deeper conversations, even if your tribe condenses a little bit after you make the decision. Isn't that so great? Like, you can actually have like really in-depth conversations with people that actually have meaning. So I think that's a huge part.
Yep, and I will say, true to brand, this idea of, my name, Chasing Creation, like for me, a lot of it is focusing on, like, I really think that a lot of our lives are what you create from it. Like, you have the choice to kind of make your life look the way you want it to. And so I think it does take some rebuilding of your identity and thinking about who you want to be. And if you were holding space for, like, I'm going to be a mom and that's going to take up this huge part of my life, like, it does open up this space of, like, okay, who am I without that? And I think it does require maybe a little bit more soul searching. Like, that's kind of an easy plug where, like, I'm a mom, that's now my identity, it's my role, it's where I spend my time, my purpose. And it does take a little bit more work to really do that soul searching, to rebuild your identity, figure out who you are outside of that. So I think all the women on here are creating resources to help you do that and help identify those parts of yourself, and show you how they're creating amazing lives without children. And so cheers to all you guys. Thank you for being on. Cheers. And I'm looking forward to see what you guys all do next. So thank you.
Awesome.
Thanks for everyone who joined us at home. Bye.
Yeah, thanks so much, Katie. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.